Okay, this is chapter 2 of The Night Singer. 2. Breakfast! Rebecca Forsland shouted, knocking on the door beneath the picture of a unicorn Molly had drawn for her big brother. The painkillers had numbed her headache to a dull throb, but the nausea was going nowhere. Rebecca had barely slept a wink since last night. The alcohol leaving her system had only worsened her anxiety. She had tried to lie still at first, to avoid disturbing Petrie, but at some point in the small hours, she had crawled out of bed and taken a hot shower before returning to bed. When his alarm went off this morning, she had pretended to be asleep, and though she was awake, it had been a struggle to get up when her own alarm started ringing. Joel hated having to rush in the mornings, and he wouldn't appreciate being woken up with just half an hour to get ready for the bus. His classes didn't start until 9 on Wednesdays. Rebecca didn't wait for an answer before opening his door. The boy could sleep through anything. A few nights earlier, Jared's garage had burned down, and the fire engine had arrived with sirens wailing. Joel was probably the only person in the whole of Gardby who hadn't woken up. Fortunately, the fire hadn't spread. His room smelled faintly of sweat and hormones and the awful incense sticks he insisted on burning. Rebecca moved over to the window, raised the blind, and opened it, breathing in the cool, crisp air. Having a teenager was nothing like she imagined it would be. Joel could be moody sometimes, but he kept it all inside, spending hours hunched over a sketch pad or staring at the computer. He almost always did as he was told, and she rarely had to nag him about the clothes on the floor or doing his homework, yet the worry was always there, that he would end up a homebody, that he wouldn't be able to manage life out in the real world. The darkness in him frightened her. Rebecca turned around, and it took her a moment to process what she was seeing. Joel's bed was empty. His black duvet was heaped in the middle of the mattress, but that was nothing new. She didn't want to impose rules on the kids that she herself didn't keep, and since she had heard that bed mites preferred neatly made beds, she only bothered when they were expecting company. Her mind raced back to the night before. They had gone over to Gabriel and Ulrika's for a barbecue. As a rule, they stayed home on weeknights, but it was Gabriel's 40th birthday, and Ulrika had bought him an expensive grill, inviting them over to try it. Memories of Gabriel paralyzed her for a moment, but she quickly brushed them to the side. Thinking about him was too painful right now. Joel had brought Molly home and put her to bed around 9 o'clock. When Rebecca and Petrie got back a few hours later, she had looked in on both of them. It wasn't just the outline of Joel's thin body she had seen in bed. She specifically remembered seeing his dark, messy hair. But now his bed was empty. What did that mean? Joel never snuck out at night. Rebecca headed down to the kitchen as her anxiety levels continued to rise. Molly sensed it and looked up from her cereal. "Do you want me to go and wake him up?" she asked. Rebecca occasionally sent Molly upstairs to drag Joel out of bed. However stubborn and withdrawn he might be in the morning, his little sister always managed to get through to him. There were 9 years and a messy relationship between them. Rebecca sometimes wished she had met Petrie sooner, so that he could have fathered both her children. She should call him now, she realized. Petrie had left for Castellosa an hour earlier. A young couple had hired him to renovate the kitchen in their summer house before they had came to the island in early June. Rebecca doubted Joel had snuck out without her noticing it, not after 4 o'clock in any case, but she couldn't be sure, and Petrie might have given him a ride. He did that sometimes, whenever Joel missed the bus or needed to go to school earlier. Morbelonga was on his way after all. She tried to find her phone, convinced she had left it on the kitchen worktop. "Mommy?" asked Molly. "Joel has already left," Rebecca told her. "He's going on a school trip today. I forgot." The lie came out so easily. "I want to go on a trip too." Molly looked up at her, waiting for a reply, but all Rebecca could do was nod. Where the hell was her goddamn phone? She rummaged through the pile of old newspapers, moving the box of cereal so abruptly that it tipped over. Another wave of nausea rose up in her, and she raised a hand to her mouth, took a few quick sips from the glass of water she had filled to wash down the painkillers. Eventually, she found her phone on top of the microwave where she always left it. Rebecca went out onto the porch to call Petrie. She didn't want Molly to hear her. He answered after 3 rings. "Did you give Joel a lift this morning?" she asked. "No, his classes start later today." "Did you see him?" "No. Why?" "His bed was empty when I went up to wake him." Saying it aloud gave fuel to her fears, and Rebecca let out a sob. I'm sure he just got a ride with someone else, said Petrie, or took an earlier bus. He was trying to reassure her, but his words had the opposite effect. There was no logical explanation for Joel's empty bed. He didn't have any group work to prepare, no homework he had forgotten, and those were the only reasons he ever went to school before he absolutely had to. Have you tried calling him? Of course I have, Rebecca snapped, hanging up. What the hell was wrong with her? Calling Joel had never even crossed her mind. She scrolled down to his number, but his phone was switched off. Maybe that was why she hadn't immediately tried to reach him, because she had known it would be. That excuse felt better than blaming her hung-over, sleep-deprived, emotional wreck of a head in any case. 15 years of parental guilt came crashing down on her, making her sway. No matter how hard she tried, she was never enough. But rather than wallow in that, she called Joel's friend, Nadine. When did you last speak to Joel? She asked without even saying hello. Yesterday. Why? Do you know what he's doing today? There was a brief silence that Rebecca interpreted as hesitation. Going to school, I guess, said Nadine. Rebecca didn't have the energy to argue. The teenager's hesitation could be because of so many things. Nadine had moved from Garby to Kalmar on the mainland 3 years earlier, but she was still the person Joel spent the most time with. Rebecca sometimes wondered if they were a couple, but she had not learned to ask. In truth, she hoped they weren't. Joel had never said anything, but Rebecca knew that Nadine had tried to kill herself at least once, that it was one of the reasons she had moved. If you talk to him, would you ask him to call me? Sure. Molly came out onto the porch wearing her pink unicorn backpack. She probably needed a jacket. It wasn't quite warm enough to go without yet, but Rebecca decided not to get one. She didn't bother asking if Molly had brushed her teeth either. Apparently that was something children typically lied about anyway. Instead, she took her daughter's hand and they started walking towards Gardby School. It was no more than 800 meters away, but Rebecca didn't trust Molly on the road. The girl was far too easily distracted. She also didn't trust the people racing by in their cars. Too many of them ignored the speed limit. Molly giggled. What's so funny? Are you really going to walk to school in those? Rebecca looked down at her feet and realized she was wearing Petrie's wooden clogs, which were at least 7 sizes too big for her. Whoops, she smiled, but her smile quickly faded as she remembered the question going around and around in her mind. Where was Joel? They passed the burned-out garage. The black wall was all that was left of it, the rest a pile of warped black beams and planks sticking up like arms waving for help. The smell of smoke was still so sharp that it made her nose sting. There had been a thunderstorm that night, but many people were convinced it was deliberate. Fires were a touchy subject in the area. For a couple of years in the late 1950s, a pyromaniac had terrorized eastern Oland, but the police had never managed to catch the culprit. Then in March 2003, Esther Jensen had died when her house was set alight with her inside. Between 2005 and 2012, a further 6 people had died in fires in the north of the island. The last of those fires in a garage had been started in an attempt to cover up a double murder. Molly didn't even look up as they passed the garage. Instead, she spent the whole walk to school talking about what games she was going to play during break. Something about kings and knights. Rebecca murmured often enough to get away with not really listening. After a quick hug, Molly ran off into the yellow school building Rebecca herself had attended 30 years earlier. There had been fewer children back then, but plenty was still the same. Rebecca paused for a moment at a loss for what to do next. Hello? She turned towards the voice. It belonged to Ulrika, who was dropping off Elias. He would be 9 this autumn and wasn't particularly keen on having his mother chaperone him. Ulrika forced him into a hug before letting him go. Thanks for last night, said Rebecca. It was nice, wasn't it? Though she had drunk her fair share the previous evening, Ulrika looked considerably fresher than Rebecca felt. She had showered and was wearing a light face of makeup. There was just a hint of shadow beneath her eyes that her concealer had failed to cover. Ulrika was hopeless when it came to planning and had invited them over across the hedge the same day, whispering that it was a birthday surprise for Gabriel. In addition to Elias, they also had a daughter, Lena, who was a year younger than Joel. The fact that the two couples had children who were roughly the same age was one of the many reasons they had started spending time together when they became neighbors 7 years earlier. Rebecca, Petrie, and Joel had moved into the house just a few months before Molly was born. How had Joel seemed last night? A little low, perhaps, but he and Lena had gone inside to draw together. She wanted to learn how to do portraits. Her drawing had actually been surprisingly good, though she would never be quite as skilled as Joel. Rebecca and Ulrika walked home together, Ulrika pushing her mint green bicycle. She worked on the checkout at Almer's and had changed her hours to fit around the children's schedule. During the week, she didn't begin until 9, though she often took extra shifts on weekends to boost her hours. "Is Lena at school?" asked Rebecca. "I really hope so." Ulrika gave her a concerned look, and Rebecca found herself blurting out all her worries. "I'm just sure he went in early," Ulrika told her. "Come on, this is Joel we're talking about." Rebecca's own teenage years had made her think Joel's would be worse, but she had never once caught him with booze. She had never even caught him in a lie. Rebecca glanced over at Ulrika. She really had enjoyed the barbecue. It had been surprisingly easy for the 4 adults to spend time together over the past few months, possibly because they had so many similar evenings to fall back on. But it wouldn't work going forward. Not after what Gabriel had done to her. Rebecca seriously doubted he would tell Ulrika about it. He was too weak for that. She personally had no intention of saying anything to Petrie. "See you later," said Ulrika, turning off toward her house. Rebecca knew she should head into the studio. She scraped together a living making and selling pottery and had an order for a fruit bowl to finish off. She also painted watercolors, though she rarely sold any of them. Deep down, she knew she wouldn't be able to concentrate, so she went into the kitchen instead and poured herself the last of the coffee. She knew Joel would be angry, but she had no other option. She called the school and was put through to the assistant principal. "Is Joel Forsland there?" Rebecca asked. "Oh, I'm glad you called," said the woman she had sold a set of teacups to. "I was just about to get in touch with you. Joel wasn't in school yesterday either. Has something happened?"